So I came home yesterday and went on to Twitter, and I saw that Bill Maher's name was trending. And it turns out that he wrote a rather incendiary, although short, blog post questioning the significance of Stan Lee, the cultural veneration of comic books, and somehow suggesting that a society that takes comic books seriously and a generation, i.e. millennials, who takes comic books seriously somehow contributed to the election of Trump. Now, Bill Maher is a polemicist. He's a comic. He knows how to get attention. So this is a very, I think, premeditated piece. I don't think that this is necessarily an attack on Stan Lee the person, but this is a culturally opportunistic time for him to make a criticism that he's made time and again on his show if you watch him, and that is that the comic book and superhero craze is stupid and distracts people from more important issues. Now, equally interesting was the reaction to Bill Maher. And it was a reaction of disgust, of disdain, and in some extreme cases of people questioning his right to free speech. So I think the whole situation is an interesting commentary on the kind of decline of American political and cultural discourse. I think, it's perfectly fair to question the cultural significance of a famous figure, even after he dies, as long as it's respectful and not overtly mean-spirited. And, Maher doesn't go after Stan Lee's family here. He's asking a cultural question. So the idea that this would create whole groups of people talking at cross purposes, not really listening to each other, is, I think, symptomatic of our political moment. But the whole thing was interesting for me because if, we have Bill Maher on the one hand and the comic book industry on the other, I'm actually far more sympathetic to Bill Maher and his style of humor than I am to comic books. I never really got into comic books, and yet I think Bill Maher's position here is deeply flawed. We'll take his 3 points one by one. First, questioning the importance of comic books and Marvel in the sort of American media and cultural landscape. I think that is kind of a silly point. I think comic books are objectively important as a kind of just popular medium of entertainment. They have been for generations. Stan Lee was a major figure in that form of media, so it's, I think, untrue to say that, this is nonsensical. He goes on to say that because America has so many colleges that, we have dumb people becoming professors and taking comic books seriously. And if you take my first point, then certainly anything that popular deserves scholarly attention. Now, I'm not saying that, people should devote their intellectual energy to doing a close reading of every X-Men comic book, but at the same time, comic books are sociologically interesting. They're culturally interesting. I think they are a form of literature, and as such, you can look at how they portray certain issues over time and how they change as an aesthetic form over time. I think those are valid questions and worthy of people's attention. And as far as his point at the end, connecting the election of Donald Trump, which for him is the greatest, cultural catastrophe of the past 50 years, to a generation of kids reading comic books is, I think, just provocation without substance, a sort of deliberate attempt to end the post on some clickbait and further piss off a group of readers that I think he's already done a good job of pissing off. But even if Maher's examples are misplaced, I think he's justified in his suspicion of some of the issues on the periphery of comic book popularity in America. I think the fact that comic books, and particularly comic book movies, seem to be the only thing Hollywood is focusing on these days is a story worth telling. And the fact that our time and some aspect of our cultural and political life speak to some of the issues in comic books or a need that is served by comic books is an interesting topic to pursue. I don't know enough about comic books myself to go into any great detail on that, but it's certainly something I wish Maher would expound upon in maybe a future post. Now, on the other hand, he does bring up another point that really hit close to home, and that is, he says, about 20 years or so ago, people didn't have to give up the kid stuff. And I think he is dead on in pointing that out. And I don't think that's an innocent development. Yes, the internet has allowed us to relive our youths and reconsume the cultural products of our youths. But why are we doing that? That's not necessarily a positive story, and I'll point the finger right at myself. How is it possible that I have a closet filled with 1,000 retro games, and yet I have a shaky pension? Perhaps I should be focusing on the latter of those 2 points, and yet I come home and play Chrono Trigger on a Friday night. Maher doesn't really have any answers to that question, but I think he's justified in broaching the topic. So it's an interesting situation. You have, on the one hand, questions about the ability of someone to criticize someone recently deceased. You have political questions, you have generational conflict, and you have a question about the value of pop culture all wrapped in to one debate. I'd be very interested to see what you guys think. Leave some comments below.